All right, this is lesson 4.3, part 2, concerning linear function patterns. So in part 1, we learned what a linear function is and what it looks like, and then we established this goal of trying to represent linear functions as graphs, as tables, and as equations. And in part 1, we just focused on tables and equations. How do we turn an XY table into an equation? A linear function equation. In this lesson, we're going to now add in graphs. How do we start with a graph, make an XY table, and then turn that into an equation? So doing the same thing with these linear function patterns, just representing it in all three ways: as a graph, as a table, an XY table, and as an equation. So we're doing the same thing where we're going to take the points off the graph, put them into an XY table, and then use our points from the XY table to create that equation, figuring out what's the relationship between -4 and 0, or how do I turn -4 into 0, or -2 into 1. What's the function that links them? And that's what our equation will be. And so same thing that we've been doing, just kind of adding in this graph piece. So let's look at an example. All right, so in the example that we're going to look at together, it involves a real situation. We're graphing something with real units. Like in this case, we're looking at the calories burned while kayaking for however many hours a person is kayaking, and that's true of the practice examples that you'll look at on your assignment as well. And so what that kind of means is sometimes you get larger numbers, or what would be more real numbers. It's not simple small numbers. And so you can see here in our graph that we're going to be dealing with some large numbers, but it's going to work the exact same way in our practice, and the same thing that we have been doing the last 2 days. So what are we doing here? We're given this graph. Okay, and our instructions, and what's going to be the instructions for your practice, is to take this graph and create, 1, an XY table. So just a table that shows the X's and Y's. And then 2, an equation that models this graph, or the function in this graph. And so those are the two things that we'll be doing with this practice. So let's start with the XY table. So you could put any points from your graph onto the XY table because this is a linear function. And it's a continuous linear function. And so that means where you see this line, there's actually all of these points in between here. There's a few points that are highlighted here that are made a little bit bigger, but there's actually infinite amount of points on this line. Okay? And so what I want you to do for your XY tables is just focus on the points that are highlighted, okay, or that are a little bit bigger or easier to see. Just focus on those to put that into your XY table. So my first point is here, 2, 600. Now you got to remember which is the X and which is the Y. The 2 is my X, the Y is 600, right? You can see my X's down here are the hours, and my Y's down here, or over here, are the calories burned. So my first X in this image that I'll put is 2, and the Y that goes with it is 600. Okay? That's this point right here, 2, 600. My X is 2, my Y is 600. So what this is saying is, after 2 hours of kayaking, this person has burned 600 calories. Okay? That's what this graph is showing us. Next, we see that after 4 hours, they burn 1,200 calories, right? That's this point right here. And after 6 hours, they burn 1,800 calories. And after 8 hours, 2,400 calories. And so there's my XY table based off of the graph. And so that's the first thing that you want to do, is just create that XY table for this graph. Now we need to figure out what's our equation that models this. Okay? So we have the graph form of the function. We just put it in the table form of the function. Now we want to figure out what's the equation form of the function. And to do that, we do what we've been doing the last few days, which is try to figure out the pattern here. What's the relationship between 2 and 600, between 4 and 1200? How do I turn a 2 into a 600? Now you might say, well, that's a big number. I don't know how to do that. How do you go from a 2 to a 600? Well, we can actually use the same skills and processes that we've done before. So let's start just with adding. How do we go from 2 to 600? 2 plus what is going to get me to 600? Now it may take you a second to think about that, but it's 598, right? Because 2 plus 598 is equal to 600. You could also think about it as 600 minus 2 is 598, and so that would tell you what this number is. But if you remember, if we're going to add 598 to 2, we also have to add it to 4 and see if that gets us to 1200. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, obviously that's not going to work, but let's make sure. 4 plus 598 is 602. Okay? Well, that doesn't get us to 1200, so this isn't going to work. Right? Just adding 598 to our x values is not going to get us to our y values. That's not the relationship, or that's not the pattern. So we need to find another way of connecting 2 and 600. How else can we make a 2 into a 600? Well, let's try multiplying. What can we multiply by to get to 600? 300. Okay. 2 times 300 is 600. And again, if you weren't sure about that, you could take 600 divided by 2, and that would give you 300. So 2 times 300 is equal to 600. All right, so that's another way we can get to 600. So let's see if that works for 4 and 1200. If I take 4 times 300, okay, what's 4 times 300? Use your calculator if you don't know. It's 1200. Well, that's good. That worked. All right, now what's 6 times 300? That's 1800. Perfect. That's what we needed to. We needed to turn a 6 into an 1800. And last one, what's 8 times 300? Your calculator would tell you 2400, okay, which is what we needed right here. So in each time, I took each of my x values times 300, and that gave me my y values. So that's the pattern that works for all of them. Remember, it has to work for all of them. So it didn't work to just add 598. We had to multiply by 300 in order to get to our y values. So our function, we would say, is y is equal to, each time we took 300 times our x value. We took 300 times our x value. And so that would be our function. So I know that the big numbers may feel like they're kind of throwing you off, but that just may take a second then to figure out, okay, what is, what do I have to multiply by, what do I have to add in order to get to that number? And you might have to continue to play around with it. And you might try dividing, right? 600 divided by 2, that's what gave me 300. Okay? And so that's what, and then I could figure out, okay, if I multiply by 300, does that give me 600? If I multiply by 300, that gave me 1200, and so on. And so this is your function, y equals 300x. Because what this is saying is, to get the y values here, I have to multiply my x values here by 300. Okay. And so this table and this function equation are what your answers are going to be for your practice. That's what we're trying to do, is take the graph, turn it into a table, and then turn it into an equation. Okay. So this is what we're going to work with. It'll take a little bit of time, but this is what we're going to do.